Get out. Grant's voice cut through the rain like a blade. He's not our problem. Sadie looked at the man on the floor. His hand was the wrong color. His breathing was wrong. Everything about this moment was wrong, and she was the only one who could see it. She looked back at Grant. Then she took off her apron. If you believe one act of courage can change everything, stay with this story until the very end. Subscribe to our channel and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The storm hit Kingman, Arizona, the way desert storms always did, without warning and without mercy. One moment, the sky was the flat, burned-out black of a late October night. The next, the wind was moving sideways across the highway, bending the fuel pump canopy at Desert Lantern Travel Center until the metal groaned like something alive and in pain. Rain came down, not in drops but in sheets, the kind that turned headlights into smeared halos and made the white lines on the asphalt disappear entirely. Sadie Monroe was behind the counter when she heard the sound. Not the storm, not the thunder that rolled across the Mojave like a freight train with no schedule. Something underneath all of that, a low, grinding drag. The specific sound of a machine being pushed by a man who had already given everything he had and was running on something that wasn't quite strength anymore. She looked up from the cash drawer she was counting and saw him through the plate glass. He was on foot, both hands on the handlebars of a Harley-Davidson that had clearly been in some kind of contact with the road recently. The left mirror was gone. The exhaust pipe on the rider's side was scraped down to bare metal. He was pulling the bike more than steering it, leaning into the effort with his whole body, and even from 30 feet away, through rain-streaked glass and the yellow wash of the overhead fluorescence, Sadie could see that something was wrong with his left hand. It was the wrong size. That was the first thought that came to her, a thought that didn't make immediate sense until she understood what she was actually seeing. The hand gripping the handlebar was swollen, not slightly, significantly. The kind of swelling that meant something was broken inside, or something had been crushing it, or both. He got the bike under the canopy and let it lean against one of the pump stations. Then he stood there for a moment, with both hands braced on the seat, his head down, his chest working harder than it should have been for a man who had just walked 50 feet. Sadie moved toward the door. Don't. Grant Vickers didn't look up from his phone. He was the overnight supervisor, 38 years old, 6 years at Desert Lantern, the kind of manager who had learned exactly how much effort to keep his job and had never once exceeded it. We've had biker trouble before. Let him pump his gas and go. He's not pumping gas. He can barely stand up. Then he'll figure it out. Sadie pushed the door open. The rain hit her immediately, cold, hard, relentless. She crossed the 10 feet between the entrance and the fuel pump canopy and came around the side of the Harley. And when the man turned to look at her, she stopped. He was older than she'd expected. Late 50s, maybe. A broad face that had spent a lot of years in weather. His beard was soaked flat against his jaw. He wore a leather vest cut, in the language of motorcycle culture, over a black, long-sleeve shirt. And on the back of that vest, visible even now, even wet, were the unmistakable colors. The bottom rocker said Arizona. The top rocker said Hell's Angels. The center patch was the Death's Head, the skull with wings, the logo that appeared in enough news stories and enough movies that even someone who'd never met a biker in her life would recognize it immediately. Sadie recognized it. She also recognized that his left hand was bad. Really bad. Sir, she said. Are you hurt? He looked at her with the particular wariness of a man who had learned a long time ago that strangers approaching him usually wanted something. I've been worse. Your hand looks worse than it is. It didn't. She'd spent 14 months in an EMT certification program before her father got sick and the money ran out, and she had to make choices that nobody her age should have to make. She knew what a hand looked like when something was broken. She also knew what a person looked like when they were fighting off the early stages of shock. The pale skin, despite the cold, the controlled breathing that was really just a practiced way of managing pain, the way his weight was distributed slightly off-center, favoring the right side of his body Without seeming to notice, he was doing it. I need you to come inside, she said. I just need to sit for a minute. You can sit inside. He looked at the plate glass door. Through it, she could see Grant watching them with his arms crossed and his phone still in his hand. Your manager doesn't look thrilled about that idea, the man said. He'll manage. She got him through the door. He moved slowly, carefully, the way people moved when they were trying not to let their body know how serious things had gotten. Grant straightened up the moment they crossed the threshold. I told you. He needs first aid, Sadie said. She was already moving toward the storage room where the emergency kit was kept. His hand might be broken, and he's showing early signs of shock. You're going to nothing. Grant stepped in front of her. Not touching her, he was smart enough to know better than that, but blocking her path with his body. This isn't a clinic. We have a policy. What policy? No gang members on the premises. It's a liability issue. The biker stood just inside the door, dripping onto the floor, watching this exchange with an expression that was impossible to read. 3 other customers were in the store, a trucker, at the coffee station, a couple near the back coolers who had gone very still. Nobody moved. He's a customer, Sadie said. He didn't buy anything. He just walked in. Then he can walk back out. Grant looked past her at the biker. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We've got a strict policy about what? The man said. His voice was quiet, not threatening, just quiet in the way that made the surrounding noise feel louder. Bleeding in the rain? Is that the policy? About motorcycle clubs on the property. I'm not a club right now. I'm a man with a busted hand who drove his bike into a drainage ditch about 2 miles back because somebody parked a service truck halfway into the entrance lane with no lights on. So I'll buy whatever you need me to buy, answer whatever questions you need me to answer, and sit somewhere that isn't the asphalt until I can think straight again. That a problem? Grant looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Sadie. He sits by the door. You don't touch him. He doesn't go past the register. And if anything happens, I understand, Sadie said. And she was already moving again. She got the emergency kit. She got the man into the chair they kept near the entrance for elderly customers who needed to rest. She crouched down in front of him and opened the kit and looked at his hand in the light. It was definitely broken. 2 fingers, maybe 3, and there was a deep laceration across the palm that had been bleeding for a while. She could tell by the way it had dried and reopened and dried again. The pattern of it, telling a story about the last hour that he hadn't bothered to tell himself. What's your name? She asked. He watched her work. Raymond. People call me Rook, Sadie Monroe. She cleaned the laceration with what she had. It wasn't enough, but it was what there was. This needs stitches, Rook, and imaging. Your fingers, I know. Do you have someone I can call? I've got people. Are they close? He hesitated. Define close. She looked up at him. He was looking at her hands at the way she was working, quick and methodical, doing the right things in the right order despite having nothing close to the right equipment. You know what you're doing, he said. I studied it. I didn't finish. Why not? She didn't answer that. She wrapped his hand with what she had, got pressure on the laceration, and told him to hold it. He did. His grip was steady, even with the wrong hand. You need to go to the hospital, she said. After what? He didn't answer that either. Grant had retreated behind the counter, but he was watching. Sadie could feel it the way a person could feel, a specific kind of attention on them. Not curious, but calculating, adding things up in a way that wasn't going to produce a number she'd like. The trucker at the coffee station poured himself a cup and left without looking at anyone. The couple in the back bought 2 sodas and kept their eyes down as they paid and walked out. Just Sadie and Rook and Grant and the rain hammering the canopy outside. My saddlebag, Rook said quietly. Sadie looked at him. Left side. There's a package in there. Documents and a prescription container. It needs to get to Flagstaff before 6 in the morning. He paused. That's why I was riding in this. That's why I didn't stop when the bike went down the first time. Sadie studied his face. He wasn't telling a story. He wasn't performing. He was giving her a fact the same way someone gave you directions because you needed to know it, not because he wanted anything from the telling. "What's in Flagstaff?" she asked. "A man named Delbert Hines. He's 63 years old, and he's been waiting 6 weeks for medication that his insurance denied and that his chapter raised the money to cover through proper channels. I've been carrying it from Phoenix." He looked at his wrapped hand. "I was supposed to be there at midnight." It was 11:47. Sadie stood up. She walked to the window and looked at the bike under the canopy. The saddlebag was visible on the left side, intact, the latches closed. She also looked at something else she hadn't noticed when she first came out to meet him. The concrete around the fuel pump closest to the entrance pump, number 2, had a smell that wasn't entirely covered by the rain. A flat, chemical smell that she recognized because she'd smelled it once before, when a friend's car had developed a slow fuel leak in a parking garage. Gasoline, not fresh, not a spill, a seep. Something that had been bleeding into the concrete for a while. "Grant," she said, turning around. "Is there a problem with pump 2? His expression flickered. "Just barely. The maintenance crew looked at it last week." And? "And it's fine." It wasn't fine. She could smell it from here. Rook shifted in the chair and then went very still in a way that alarmed her. His head came down slightly. His breathing changed shallower, quicker. "Rook." She was back across the room in 3 steps. "Stay with me." "I'm with you." But his voice had a new texture to it, thinner. "What medications are you taking? Is there anything I need to know about right now?" "Metformin." And he stopped. His jaw tightened. "There's a blood thinner I'm supposed to avoid." "Cuts. You're on a blood thinner and you have an open lesion." Sadie straightened up. "I need a better kit. You need pressure, and you need it now." "Grant, where is the secondary first aid cabinet? The one with the proper bandaging?" "We don't have a secondary." "Yes, you do. OSHA requires it for facilities over a certain square footage. I saw it when I was hired." "Where is it?" Grant's mouth tightened. "Storage room." "But you can't." She was already moving. She found the cabinet. She got what she needed. She came back and she worked, and Rook let her, and outside the rain kept hammering, and the desert kept doing what deserts did, absorbing everything, holding nothing, patient in the way that only very old and very indifferent things could be patient. "You should have let me stay outside," Rook said at one point. "Then we'd both be soaked. I mean, for your sake." She looked up at him. "I don't take medical advice from patients." Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly, more like a recognition. The particular look of someone who has just encountered something they weren't expecting and isn't sure yet what to do with it. Grant came around the counter. His arms were crossed. His voice had dropped to the register he used when he wanted to sound like someone making a reasonable business decision instead of someone afraid of something. "Monroe, I need you back at the register." "I'll be there in 5 minutes now." She kept working. 5 minutes, Grant." The silence that followed had weight to it. The kind that arrived before something changed, before the balance of a situation tipped from tense to something else. "Monroe." His voice was flat now. "If you don't come back to the counter, I'm going to have to consider this a performance issue." She looked up at him. "You're going to write me up for rendering first aid to an injured customer?" "I'm going to write you up for abandoning your post and creating a liability situation. Leaving an injured person without assistance is the liability situation. He's not." Grant stopped. He looked at Rook. Then he looked back at her. "He's not our liability. He's a person in our facility. He's hurt, and I'm the only person in this building who knows what they're doing. You're a cashier. Tonight, I'm the only one here who's bothered to look at him." Another silence. This one longer. Then Rook said, "It's all right. It's not all right," Sadie said, to Rook. Then she turned back to Grant. "Give me 5 minutes to finish this properly and I'll be back at the register." Grant walked back to the counter without answering. She finished. She got the bandaging right. She got the pressure consistent. She looked at Rook's color and decided it was slightly better than it had been. "You need the hospital," she said again. "Call me a cab when you're back at your register," he said. "I'll wait." She went back. She counted change for a man who came in for cigarettes. She filled the coffee carafes because it was that time of hour. She did the things she was paid to do, and she kept one eye on the chair by the door, where Rook sat with his hand wrapped and his eyes mostly open. She was refilling the paper towel dispenser in the restroom hallway when she heard it. Not a crash, not a bang, a sound that was quieter than it should have been, a slow, solid contact, like something heavy meeting the floor without drama. She came out of the hallway and the chair was empty. She was through the door before Grant could say anything. He was on the ground beside Pump 2. Not unconscious, she could see him trying to push himself up, one arm working while the other, the wrapped one, refused to cooperate. He'd made it maybe 15 feet from the door. Before his body made the decision, his mind had been fighting. The chemical smell was stronger out here, significantly stronger. She understood, in the same instant, that she understood several other things. The service truck that had been parked here until an hour ago, the maintenance crew that had looked at Pump 2 and apparently decided not to say anything, the slow seep of fuel into concrete that had been happening long enough to saturate the ground around the pump base. She creaked beside Rook. "I've got you. You need to not be next to an active fuel leak. Come on." She got her arm under his good shoulder. He was a large man. She was 5'4" and 130 pounds, and he probably had 80 pounds on her, but she'd moved people before. In the clinical practicals, before the money ran out, and the mechanics of it came back to her body, the way physical memory did, without requiring her mind's involvement. She got him moving. There was a small company vehicle, a Dodge ProMaster cargo van, parked 20 feet away in the service lot. It was technically the emergency vehicle, kept fueled and stocked for employee use in exactly this kind of situation. She'd seen the key hanging in the management office. She looked at the van. She looked at Rook. She looked at the pump. She went and got the key. She was halfway back across the lot when Grant appeared in the doorway. "Monroe, stop." She kept walking. "Monroe, that vehicle is company property. I'm moving an injured man away from a fuel leak. I'll have it back in 20 minutes. She got the door open. She helped Rook in. "Call 911 if you haven't already. I'm telling you right now, if you drive that vehicle." She drove it. She got Rook to the other side of the lot, away from the pump, away from the chemical smell, away from every variable she couldn't control. She called 911. She gave them the address, gave them his approximate condition, gave them what she knew about the blood thinner situation. She stayed on the line. She kept her hand steady. She did not panic, because panicking was a luxury that helped no one, and she had never in her life been able to afford it. When she finally let herself take a full breath, Rook was looking at her from the passenger seat. "The package in my bag," he said. "Flagstaff." "I know." She looked at the time. 12:09. "Tell me who to call." He gave her a number. She called it. She spoke to a man named Pete, who said he'd have someone there within the hour. She relayed the situation at the garage, Rook's condition, the hospital they'd be going to. Pete asked her name twice. She gave it both times. She went back to the store to wait for the ambulance. Grant was standing at the counter. He did not look at her immediately. He looked at the forms on the counter, some kind of documentation he'd already started, the kind you prepared in advance of a decision you'd already made. "You're terminated, Monroe," he said. His voice was calm. The calmness of someone who had decided before the situation even resolved itself, who had known from the moment she walked out that door exactly where this was going to end. Unauthorized use of company property, abandonment of post, insubordination. Your last paycheck will be mailed. Sadie stood there. She was still wet. Her hands were still slightly unsteady from adrenaline. Through the window behind Grant, she could see the ambulance lights already turning off the highway. She looked at him for a long moment. "The fuel leak at Pump 2, she said. "How long have you known?" His expression didn't change. "I'll take that as a while." She put the van key on the counter. "Make sure the paramedics know he's on blood thinners." She picked up her bag. She put on her jacket. She walked out past the ambulance that was pulling in, past the paramedics she flagged down and briefed in 45 seconds before stepping aside, past the Harley that still leaned against the pump and the saddlebag on its left side that she knew contained something important to someone, somewhere, that had nothing to do with drugs or guns or any of the things Grant had been composing in his head from the moment Rook walked through the door. She stood in the parking lot in the rain. Behind her, the paramedics worked. In front of her, the highway stretched out into nothing, dark, wet, indifferent, going both directions at once. She had 12 days until her mother's mortgage payment was due. She had 2 jobs, and now she had one. She had done everything she'd learned how to do, and she'd done it right, and she had been fired for it. And the man whose life she just spent the last 90 minutes holding together didn't know her last name until 15 minutes ago. She'd made a choice. She'd make it again tomorrow. That didn't make standing in the rain at 12:30 in the morning any easier. The ambulance doors closed. The lights came on. The siren was brief, a short pulse, just enough to clear the lot. Then the vehicle moved, steady and purposeful, and took Raymond Callahan toward the hospital. And Sadie Monroe stood in the dark and watched it go. Her phone buzzed. Her mother. She let it ring. She'd figure out what to say by the time she got home. She always did. The walk home took 40 minutes because Sadie missed the last bus. She didn't call for a ride. She couldn't justify the $4. She put her head down against the wind that was still moving. After the storm had technically passed, that leftover restlessness in the air that didn't know the rain was done, and she walked. And she counted things the way she always counted things when her mind needed something specific to hold on to so it wouldn't slide toward the larger, darker calculations waiting at the edge of every thought. 12 days. That was the number. 12 days until the mortgage payment was due. The number she'd been carrying since the 3rd week of October, when she'd sat at the kitchen table with her mother's bank statements and a legal pad and worked through every column twice, because the first time she'd gotten a number she refused to accept as final. The second time gave her the same number. She'd accepted it then, the way you accepted weather, not because you wanted to, but because wanting had nothing to do with it. She had her second job, 4 shifts a week at the linen laundry on Beale Street, 6-hour shifts, work that was honest and uncomplicated and paid $11 an hour without drama. She'd been holding that as the fallback floor, the floor beneath the floor, the thing that kept the larger worry from becoming a crisis. Except the linen laundry alone didn't cover the mortgage. It covered slightly more than half the mortgage. Desert Lantern covered the rest, and a little beyond that, which was what allowed her to buy groceries without doing arithmetic in the checkout line. She ran the numbers in her head while she walked. She ran them 3 times. The 3rd time, she stopped running them. She got home at 2:10 in the morning. The porch light was on, which meant her mother hadn't gone to sleep yet, which meant Sadie had to decide right now, on the bottom step of the porch, what version of the truth she was going to tell. She pushed the door open. Carol Monroe was at the kitchen table. She was 61 years old, a woman who had spent the better part of 3 decades working check-in at the same medical clinic before the clinic was by a larger network and restructured out of all the people who'd made it what it was. She had her reading glasses on and a cup of tea in front of her that had gone cold enough to be honest, and she looked up at Sadie the way mothers looked at daughters when they already knew something had happened and were deciding whether to ask or wait. She waited. "Hey," Sadie said. "Hey." Her mother looked at her wet jacket, at the state of her generally. "You want tea?" "I'm okay. I'll make you tea." Her mother got up and filled the kettle, and Sadie sat down in the chair across from the one her mother had been sitting in, and she looked at the table for a moment, the grain of it, the coffee rings that had outlasted 2 different attempts to sand them out, the small ceramic dish her father had back from a trip to New Mexico 15 years ago that now held paper clips and a spare house key, and nothing that had anything to do with New Mexico. "There was a situation at the truck stop," she said. Her mother turned from the stove. "What kind of situation?" Sadie looked at her hands. "A man came in. He was hurt. There was a storm, you probably heard it, around 11. I heard it. He was on a motorcycle. He'd gone down in the entrance because of a parked truck, and his hand was broken, and he was on blood thinners, and Grant didn't want me to help him. The kettle was on the burner. Her mother had not moved from the stove. I helped him anyway," Sadie said. And then I used the company vehicle to move him away from a fuel leak. And Grant fired me. The silence in the kitchen had a particular texture to it. Not the silence before an argument. Her mother had never been a person who argued. Exactly. More the silence before a very honest conversation that neither party had asked for but both parties understood was necessary. Fired you, her mother said. Yes, tonight. About an hour and a half ago. Her mother turned back to the stove. She made the tea. She put the cup in front of Sadie and sat down and looked at her daughter with an expression that Sadie had spent 26 years learning to read and still sometimes got wrong. Is the man alive? Her mother asked. He was when the ambulance left. Would he be alive if you hadn't helped him? Sadie wrapped her hands around the cup. I don't know. Maybe not. Her mother nodded once. Okay. Mom, I said okay, Sadie. The mortgage, I heard you. Her mother took off her reading glasses and set them on the table. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you made the wrong call because I'm worried about a mortgage payment. I'm your mother, not a bank. The bank is also a factor. The bank is always a factor. The bank has been a factor since your father died, and it'll be a factor after I'm gone. What I'm asking you is whether you would have made the same choice if you'd known the outcome. She looked at Sadie steadily. Would you? Sadie thought about Rook on the ground beside pump 2. His hand at the wrong angle. The smell of the fuel seeping into the concrete. The way he'd looked at her when she'd helped him up. Not grateful exactly, but present, as if her presence had been the thing that allowed him to remain his own. Yes, she said. Her mother picked her reading glasses back up. Then we'll figure out the mortgage. Sadie wanted to say 5 different things. She said none of them. She drank her tea. She did not sleep. She lay in the dark and ran the numbers until they stopped being numbers and became something more like static. And then somewhere around 4 in the morning, she pulled up the job listings on her phone and began making a list of places to apply when the sun came up. She had 11 days now. She applied to 6 places by 9 o'clock. 3 acknowledged her application automatically. 2, she followed up with a phone call because her father had always told her that a voice was harder to ignore than an email address. 1 asked her to come in for an interview that afternoon, which she did. She put on the blazer she kept for these purposes, the dark gray one that still fit from the year she'd bought it. And she went and she answered their questions, and she thought she'd done well. She found out 3 days later that she hadn't gotten it. The rejection came via email at 7 in the morning while she was at the laundry, pulling sheets from an industrial dryer. She read it on her break, standing in the parking lot with her back against the brick wall. And she read it twice because the first time she was hoping she'd misunderstood the phrasing. She hadn't. The form letter was polite. It did not tell her anything useful. It did not tell her, for example, that the hiring manager had called Desert Lantern Travel Center as part of standard reference verification and had spoken to Grant Vickers, who had described Sadie Monroe as, and she was quoting from what a coworker told her 3 weeks later, insubordinate, a safety liability, and someone with poor judgment in high-pressure situations. She didn't know that yet. She found out later, and by then, it would change what everything meant. Right now, she just had a rejection letter and a wall. She went back inside and finished her shift. The second rejection came on day 8. This one she'd wanted more a clinic receptionist position at a minor emergency center on the east side of Kingman, the kind of place where her partial EMT training would mean something rather than just occupying a line on a resume. She'd interviewed well. The woman who'd interviewed her had actually said that Sadie's clinical instincts were exactly what they were looking for. The rejection came by phone, not email. The woman's voice was apologetic in a way that sounded like it was covering something else. We've decided to go in a different direction, she said. I'm sorry, Sadie. I genuinely am, Sadie thanked her. She hung up. She stood in her kitchen for a long moment with her phone in her hand. She didn't cry. She was so far past the point where crying would have done anything useful that it had become a kind of emotional nonfiction possible in theory, meaningless in practice. She called the laundry and asked for an extra shift. She got it. It wasn't enough. On day 9, her mother found the second rejection letter on the kitchen counter. Sadie had printed it and left it out by accident. And Carol Monroe read it and said nothing and left a casserole in the refrigerator with a note that said, "Eat this," written in her mother's particular capital letter handwriting that made everything sound both urgent and fond. Sadie ate it cold at midnight. She was doing the dishes when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. Arizona area code. She almost let it go. She'd been letting things go for the last 48 hours, calls she didn't have the emotional bandwidth for. Conversations she could feel would cost her more than she had. But something made her answer. The same thing that had made her put on her jacket and walk out into the rain 9 days ago. Not reason. Exactly. Just instinct. The older and quieter thing under reason that sometimes knew better. "This is Sadie," she said. Sadie Monroe, not a question. A man's voice, older, rough around the edges in the specific way of someone who'd spent a lot of time outdoors. "This is Rook." She put the dish down. "You're out of the hospital," she said. "Day before yesterday. 3 fingers and 11 stitches. They tell me I'll have full use of the hand by spring." A pause. "Pete said you called him about the medication. It needed to get there." "It did. By about 6:30. Another pause. "Delbert's doing better. I'm glad. I wanted to come by in person. If that's all right." "No entourage. Just me." She almost said no. She almost said that she was fine, that she didn't need checking on, that she was managing. She almost performed the entire choreography of self-sufficiency she'd been rehearsing since she was 19 years old, and learned that the most dangerous thing she could do was let someone see clearly how close to the edge things actually were. "Tomorrow afternoon," she said instead. After 2. He came the next day, alone, the way he'd promised. He drove a truck. She heard it pull up and looked out the window and noticed it was an ordinary truck. Nothing marked, nothing announcing anything. She let him in. Her mother happened to be at a neighbor's house, which was either fortunate or something her mother had arranged on purpose. With Carol Monroe, it was sometimes impossible to tell the difference. Rook sat at the kitchen table. She made coffee. It was the exact domestic normalcy of the situation that made it strange. A Hells Angels road captain with taped fingers and a bruised jaw sitting at her kitchen table while she waited for the percolator. He looked around the kitchen without commenting on it. She put the coffee in front of him. "I heard about the job," he said. She sat down across from him. "I figured you would eventually. I also heard about the application." She looked at him. "How? Small town. People talk." He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. "Grant's been marking your record. Told 2 employers you were a liability." There it was. The thing she'd suspected without being able to prove. Given shape and weight by someone saying it plainly. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just let it settle. "I want to give you something," Rook said. He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. He set it on the table and pushed it toward her. "It's enough to cover 3 months of whatever you need covered. No conditions, no payback, no strings. You helped me when you didn't have to, and it cost you more than you should have had to pay." Sadie looked at the envelope. She did not touch it. "I can't take that," she said. "I know you think that. I mean it. I believe that you mean it." He left the envelope where it was. "Can I ask why?" "Because it doesn't fix anything." She looked up at him. "I'm not saying that to sound noble. I mean it practically. 3 months buys me 3 months, and then everything is exactly the same. Grant still has a job. My record still says what it says. And I'm 3 months further from having built anything that's actually mine." Rook was quiet for a moment. "What would fix something?" he asked. "Nothing you can hand me in an envelope. I'm not asking what I can hand you." He picked up the coffee cup. "I'm asking what would fix something in your actual life. If you had a fair chance, not a handout, a chance, what would you build?" She hadn't expected the question. She'd expected negotiation or persistence or the kind of well-meaning pressure that came from people who genuinely wanted to help but couldn't quite separate helping from deciding. She looked at the table, at the ceramic dish from New Mexico, at the coffee rings that wouldn't sand out. "There's no emergency infrastructure on this stretch of highway," she said. "Not really. Travelers break down and they call roadside assistance, and if they're lucky, someone gets to them within 2 hours. If they're not lucky, they wait longer. If there's a medical situation, they wait for an ambulance from Kingman. If it's summer and they're elderly, sometimes waiting is the thing that kills them. She paused. I used to think about this during my EMT program. A roadside station, not a truck stop, not a commercial garage. Something that could handle first aid, basic mechanical issues, water distribution in the summer. Something that operated on a sliding scale, so it wasn't just for people who could afford a tow truck. She stopped herself. She heard what she sounded like, someone describing a thing they wanted, which she hadn't allowed herself to do in a long time. I know, she said. I know how that sounds. How does it sound? Expensive? Idealistic. Like something a 26-year-old who's about to lose her mother's house comes up with, because she doesn't want to admit that the actual problem is money. Rook set his coffee cup down. He looked at her with the expression she'd seen for the first time. In that truck stop chair, the one that meant he was weighing something. Not quickly, but with the specific gravity of a man who had learned a long time ago that fast decisions in complicated situations usually cost more than the time they saved. The fuel leak at pump 2, he said. She looked at him. What about it? You noticed it. Before you came outside to me, you noticed there was a problem. I could smell it. Had you reported it before? I'd mentioned it to Grant twice in the last month. He told me the maintenance crew had addressed it. They hadn't, Rook said. In fact, they'd specifically told Grant in writing that it needed a full pump replacement and that operating it was a safety hazard. Grant signed off saying he'd schedule it. He didn't schedule it. He redirected the maintenance budget. He paused. The service truck that was parked at the entrance without lights, that was a desert lantern vehicle. The driver was a contract employee who's been parking it there during his breaks for 6 weeks. 3 employees filed complaints. Grant archived them without response. Sadie stared at him. How do you know all of this? Because when somebody puts one of my people in a ditch and then fires the woman who kept him from bleeding out in the parking lot, I make it my business to understand the whole picture. He said it flatly, without heat. Grant has been diverting maintenance funds. Not a lot, but consistently, over about 14 months. The camera he disabled on the east side of the lot, that was 3 days after the first internal complaint about the fuel leak. He knew what he was covering. The kitchen was very quiet. Sadie sat with what he just told her, and she did not feel vindicated. She felt something heavier than vindication. The particular weight of understanding that the things she'd been blaming herself for, the things she'd been running through her mind for 9 days like a stone in a shoe, had been sitting on a foundation of deliberate wrongdoing that had nothing to do with her. She'd lost her job because Grant Vickers needed her help to stay buried. What happens with that information? She asked. That depends on a few things. He looked at her steadily. But it doesn't disappear. Evidence doesn't disappear just because someone in a position of authority decides it's inconvenient. Does the owner know? The owner is going to know very soon. Sadie looked at the envelope still sitting on the table. I still can't take that, she said. Rook nodded. He picked it up and put it back in his jacket. He didn't argue. She respected him for that more than she would have respected any number of persuasive speeches. The thing you described, he said. The roadside station. It's not a real plan, not yet. He stood up. He was a large man, and her kitchen was a small room, and the combination created a specific kind of presence, not threatening, just significant. I want to ask you something. And I want you to give me an honest answer, not the polite one. She looked up at him. If somebody gave you a building and a lease and a starting inventory, not as a gift, but as a 1-year challenge with actual conditions and accountability and the understanding that if you couldn't make it work, it would go to something else, would you try? She opened her mouth. She closed it. She thought about the mortgage, the laundry shifts, the rejection emails with their careful, hollow language. She thought about the EMT program she'd abandoned, the clinical practicals where she'd learned how to stop bleeding and check airways and move injured people without making them worse. She thought about her father, who believed until the day he died that the measure of a person was what they did with what they had, not what they had to begin with. I'd try, she said. Rook looked at her for a moment. Then he put his hat on and walked to the door and let himself out. She sat at the table for a long time after his truck pulled away. The envelope was gone. The offer was gone. But the question he'd asked, the specific shape of it, the conditions embedded in it, stayed in the room, the way certain conversations stayed, long after the people who'd had them were somewhere else, entirely. A one-year challenge, actual conditions, accountability, not a rescue, not a gift. She ran the question the same way she ran numbers, methodically, from every angle, looking for the place where the math stopped working. She ran it until she found what she was actually afraid of. She was afraid of failing at something that was actually hers. Everything she'd failed at before the EMT program, the jobs she hadn't gotten, the margins she couldn't quite make work, those had been failures of circumstance. External forces, things that happened to her. This was different. This was her plan, her idea. Her voice describing what she wanted in her own kitchen while someone who had no reason to listen actually listened. If this failed, there was no external force to point at, just her. She got up. She washed the coffee cups. She looked at the time. It was nearly 4 in the afternoon, which meant she had a laundry shift in 2 hours, which meant she had to leave in 45 minutes, which meant she had exactly 45 minutes to sit with the most complicated feelings she'd had in months. She used them. She thought about Rook's question and her answer, and the specific words she'd used. Try. Not I'd do it. Not I'd succeed. And she understood, sitting there in the kitchen that might not be hers in 3 days. That try was actually the most honest word she knew. That try was not weakness. That try was the only word that didn't lie to you about the sus of the thing you were attempting. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't have saved. It was Pete. The same Pete she'd called from the parking lot at 12:30 in the morning when Rook was in the passenger seat of the company van, and she was trying to make sure the medication reached someone she'd never met. The text said, Delbert says thank you. Says to tell you that kindness in the middle of nowhere is the kind that matters most. She read it twice. She put the phone in her pocket. She got her jacket. She went to work. 3 days later, the mortgage came due. She paid what she could and called the bank with the difference and had a conversation. She would not wish on anyone the careful, scripted sympathy of someone reading from a protocol about hardship extensions, asking questions that required her to document her situation in language that made her situation feel like a category rather than a life. She got the extension. 30 days, 1 month. 30 days to change something. She told her mother that night. Carol Monroe listened and nodded and said, good. Then we have time, as if time were the thing they'd been waiting for all along. As if 30 days were a gift instead of a countdown. Maybe both, Sadie thought. Maybe that was the same thing. She started working on a plan. A real one, not the idea she'd described at the kitchen table, but an actual document with actual numbers. She used the public library's computers because the internet at home was patchy, and she sat for 4 hours with a yellow legal pad and a library card and an atlas of federal highway data she pulled from the reference section, and she built the roughest version of a business plan she'd ever attempted. It was rough. It had gaps. The liability insurance section alone had 5 question marks and a note that said find out. But it was real. It had pages. It had her handwriting on it in ink, which meant it existed outside her head in a way that made it harder to dismiss. She was walking home from the library, the legal pad tucked under her arm, when she heard the motorcycles, just 2 of them, coming from the north, heading south on the highway. They passed her without slowing, and she didn't recognize the riders, and there was no reason to connect them to anything in her life. But something tightened in her chest. The sound of them, the specific register of it, the way it bounced off the buildings and then faded into the flat, open distance of the desert, took her back to the parking lot, to the ambulance lights, to the sound of Rook's voice in the rain, telling her about a man in Flagstaff who needed medication that he'd been carrying, because once, a long time ago, that man had done something for him. She thought about chains, not the kind on a motorcycle, the other kind, the invisible ones. The way one act of decency, in the right moment, by the right person, could travel forward in ways that defied the logic of cause and effect because it didn't move in a line. It moved like a current, in every direction at once. She thought about what Rook had asked her. If you had a fair chance, what would you build? She held the legal pad tighter. She walked home in the dark. She was on her third cup of coffee and her second revision of the insurance section when her phone buzzed at 6:47 in the morning. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. No name. Just 4 words. Look out your window. She didn't move immediately. She'd learned a long time ago that urgency invented by someone else was not automatically her urgency. And she had 40 minutes of work left before her laundry shift, and she needed every one of them. She looked at the message again. She looked at the time. She put the legal pad down and walked to the window. The street was empty. She stood there for a moment, phone in hand, feeling faintly ridiculous. She was about to go back to the table when she heard it low at first. The way thunder started, a sound that her body recognized before her mind caught up with what it was doing. A vibration more than a sound. Something coming from the direction of the highway, moving toward her, building the way things built when there was a lot of them, and they were not trying to be quiet. Motorcycles, not 2, not 10. Not even the 30 or 40 she'd read about in news articles about club runs, the numbers that journalists used when they wanted to convey scale without quite going actually meant standing on a residential street in Kingman, Arizona at 6:50 in the morning. She counted the first group before they turned the corner and she lost track. 18, 20, then the next group and the next, and she stopped counting because counting had stopped being useful. They came in organized columns, riding in staggered formation, the way riders did on long-distance runs, not chaotic, not aggressive, but structured and deliberate in a way that made the discipline of it more striking than the numbers. Leather vests, road-worn bikes, the colors that she now recognized without needing to look for them. 187, she found out later. Members and supporters from 4 chapters and 3 states. Right now, standing at her window in yesterday's clothes, with a coffee cup going cold in her hand, she just knew that there were more motorcycles on her street than she'd seen in one place in her entire life, and that they were moving steadily, and that they showed no sign of stopping. She grabbed her jacket. She was out the door in under 30 seconds. Her mother appeared in the hallway behind her. Sadie, stay inside. Please, I'll call you. She ran. Her first thought, the one that hit her before reason could organize it into something more considered, was the truck stop. She was certain that's where they were going. That this was retribution. That Rook had held back in her kitchen and was now doing what she'd feared from the beginning. That all of his talk about conditions and challenges and accountability had been the patient version of something that was about to become very visible and very loud. She ran 3 blocks before she got her breath properly under her and settled into a pace she could maintain. The column of motorcycles moved at a steady 25 miles an hour, slow enough to be purposeful, fast enough that she was losing ground. She cut across the gas station parking lot on Dunbar Street and came out ahead of them on the main road and flagged her arms. The lead rider slowed, pulled alongside her. It was Rook. "Where are you going?" she said. She was breathing hard. "Rook, look at me. Where are you going?" He looked at her with that expression she'd cataloged by now, the one that wasn't quite a smile but occupied the same general region. "Morning, Sadie. Don't morning me. You told me no entourage. This isn't for me." "Then what is it for?" He glanced at the road ahead, then back at her. "Ride with me. I don't have." He jerked his head toward the bike behind him. The rider on it, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with a beard that had clearly been gray for a long time, moved forward and offered her the back seat with the straightforward wordlessness of someone who had received specific instructions. She looked at the seat. She looked at Rook. She made a decision the way she'd been making decisions for the last 3 weeks. Not because the options were good, but because standing still was no longer one of them. She got on. The column moved. She watched Desert Lantern Travel Center approach on the left side of the road, its lights on. A single car at the pump, business moving through its ordinary morning without drama. She felt herself tense, felt her hand come up, as if she might actually reach forward and do something. And then the column did not slow, did not turn, did not direct a single degree of its attention toward the truck stop, or Grant Vickers, or any of the things she'd spent 3 weeks building into monuments of injustice in the architecture of her own head. They passed it without slowing. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. 3 miles out from the truck stop, the column turned onto a side road she'd driven past hundreds of times without registering. She'd registered it as a gravel turnoff, a property that had been empty long enough to become part of the visual background of the drive. The kind of place you stopped seeing because your brain had correctly categorized it as irrelevant. The column stopped. Engines cut. The silence was sudden and total, the way silence always was after sustained noise, not empty but full. Charged. The way the air felt after lightning. She climbed off the bike. She looked at what was in front of her. The building had been a service garage. At some point, the bones of it were still there. The wide bay doors, the lift equipment visible through the openings. The concrete apron in front that would have once been stained with oil and antifreeze, and the accumulated evidence of honest work. It had been empty for at least 3 years, based on what she didn't see: no recent tire marks, no fresh paint, no sign of occupation. But something had changed in the last week, because she'd heard it sagging on the east side before she'd ever consciously looked at the building, had been repaired. The bay doors had been rehung. The concrete had been pressure washed within the last 48 hours based on its color. Inside, she could see tools, not scattered, organized. A medical cabinet, white and new, mounted on the near wall. A workbench with equipment arranged on it in the methodical way of someone who had thought about workflow. Cases of bottled water stacked to the right of the first bay. A professional-grade first aid station that she recognized from her EMT program, the kind that cost more than she made in a month at the laundry. She stood on the concrete apron and looked at all of this and felt something she didn't have an immediate name for. Not gratitude, it wasn't soft enough for gratitude. Something with more structure than that. Something that had edges. People were emerging from trucks and cars that had pulled in behind the column. Not just riders, mechanics in work shirts, a woman in scrubs who looked like she'd come directly from a night shift somewhere. 2 older men carrying a folding table between them. A teenager who couldn't have been more than 16, hauling a box of what turned out to be electrical supplies. 20-30 people who were not wearing leather vests, who had clearly arrived separately and been here longer. Rook came to stand beside her. She didn't look at him immediately. She kept looking at the building, at the people moving in and out of it, at the sign above the entrance. That was temporary. She could see the bracket marks of something that would be replaced, but that read in plain block letters, Monroe Road Relief, 1-year community trial. She looked at it for a long time. No, she said. Rook waited. She stopped. She turned to face him. What is this exactly? Because if you bought me a business, we didn't. Then what did you do? 1-year lease on an abandoned commercial property. Owner agreed to hold it at below market rate on the condition that it's operated as a community service during the trial period. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. The tools and equipment are donated from 6 mechanics, 2 nurses, a paramedic, and about 40 people who have needed a roadside assist at some point in the last 10 years and remember what it cost them. The water is from a wholesaler who wanted to write it off as a charitable contribution. The medical cabinet is courtesy of a retired emergency room physician in Flagstaff who heard about what happened at the truck stop. The physician in Flagstaff. Delbert Hines' doctor, Rook said. They go back. Delbert made a call. Sadie looked back at the building. Her throat was doing something. She was working to keep out of her voice. The lease. Who pays the lease? Right now, the chapter holds it. If you meet the conditions at the end of the year, ownership transfers to a community trust with you as operating director. If you don't, the building goes to a general charity fund, and everybody moves on. He paused. The conditions are real, Sadie. This isn't a soft landing. You need a valid business plan filed within 60 days. You need your certifications at least EMT basic recertified, preferably more. You need to operate within a budget that's been set by the initial donors, and every dollar has to be documented. If at month 6 the operating reports show you can't make it sustainable, the trial ends early. She absorbed this, all of it. The structure of it, the deliberateness, the way it had been designed to be a challenge rather than a rescue. Why? She asked. He looked at her with something that was more complicated than she expected. Because you told me you wanted a fair chance, not a handout. And because the people in that building, the mechanics, the nurse, the old man with the electrical supplies, they've all needed someone to show up at the right moment, and most of them didn't get it. They showed up this morning because they want to be part of something that fills that gap. He looked at the sign. You named it, Sadie. It was always going to be yours. She stood there for a long moment. The people moving in and out of the garage, the organized quiet of this assembled thing, the sign above the door with her name on it, her family's name, her father's name, all of it pressed against her in a way that she was not ready for and could not have prepared for. I haven't passed my EMT recertification, she said. Then you'll need to schedule it. The insurance alone is addressed in the startup budget. Line 7, she looked at him. You made a budget. We made a starting point. You'll make the budget. She almost said something. She stopped herself. She turned back to the garage and looked at it from a different angle, not the angle of something being given to her, but the angle of something that was waiting to find out what she would do with it. She took one step forward, then another. She walked through the bay door. The woman in the scrubs looked up from the medical cabinet she was cataloging. You, Sadie? Nora Bell. She extended a hand. I'm a nurse. I'm retired. Ish. I volunteer at the community clinic on Thursdays, but they've only got me for 2 days a week, and I've been looking for somewhere useful to put the other 5. Rook says you've got EMT training. Partial. Partial's honest. I'll take honest over credential inflation. She went back to the cabinet. You know how to run an intake assessment? I know the protocol. Good. We can work with protocol. She pulled a clipboard from the cabinet. This is what we've got so far. I'd like your eyes on the medication storage. The temperature regulation on the far cabinet is from a donation. And I want someone who knows what they're looking at to tell me if it's adequate or if we need to flag it for upgrade in the budget. Sadie took the clipboard. She walked to the far cabinet. She opened it. She checked the temperature gauge. It was reading correctly, holding at the required range. She checked the seal on the door. She checked the inventory list against what was actually on the shelves. She found 2 discrepancies. She noted them on the clipboard. She handed it back to Nora. Items 914 are listed but not present. And the thermometer needs calibration. It's accurate now, but the calibration sticker is 18 months old. Nora looked at the clipboard. Then she looked at Sadie. You're going to do fine. One of the mechanics appeared in the bay door, a man in his 60s, heavyset, with the hands of someone who had been working on engines for so long that the grease had become architectural. Are you the boss? Sadie looked at him. I'm working on it. Luis Ortega. I worked at Desert Lantern for 3 years before Vickers fired me for filing a maintenance complaint. He said it without bitterness, just the flat notation of a fact that was part of his history. I know that fuel pump system better than anyone alive, which means I can tell you exactly what's wrong with it and exactly what Vickers knew and when he knew it. I've also got 35 years of roadside mechanical experience, and I work cheap because what I actually want is to stop watching people stranded on the highway because the nearest legitimate shop is 40 miles away. She looked at him for a long time. Can you start Thursday? She said. I can start now if you've got coffee. She almost laughed. It surprised her, the almost law, the way it came up from somewhere she hadn't checked in recently. I'll get coffee. She was moving toward the folding table, where someone had set up a percolator when she heard the cars. Not motorcycles. Cars. Multiple, arriving fast. The sound of tires on gravel done at a speed that meant someone was not taking their time. She came back through the bay door. 3 vehicles in the lot. 2 police cruisers and a white pickup truck. She recognized it, belonged to a man named Tom Haverfield, who managed the Desert Lantern property on behalf of the owner, a company in Phoenix she'd never directly interacted with. Grant Vickers stepped out of the passenger side of the pickup. She had not seen him since the night he'd handed her the termination. He looked different in daylight, smaller. Somehow, though his physical dimensions hadn't changed. He wore the same company shirt he always wore, and he had his phone in his hand and his jaw set in the expression of someone who had decided that offense was better than defense and was committed to that strategy regardless of how it was developing. He looked at the assembled riders, the trucks, the garage, the sign, and she watched his expression cycle through several things in quick succession: surprise, calculation, and then the particular settling of someone who had landed on an interpretation that allowed him to feel like the injured party. "There it is," he said to the officers beside him. "This is exactly what I described. Unauthorized occupation of private property. These individuals have moved onto a commercial site with the leases signed," Rook said. He had not raised his voice. He was standing 20 feet away, with his arms loose at his sides. "And he said it the way you stated a fact, to someone who already knew it. Tom has a copy. The owner's representative in Phoenix has a copy. You can call them if you'd like." Tom Haverfield did, in fact, already have a copy. Sadie could see it in his hand. She could also see, from the way he was holding it and the way he was not making eye contact with Grant, that he had not been consulted before Grant decided to call the police. "This is an intimidation effort," Grant said. He turned to the officers. "You can see what this is. These are motorcycle gang members using a property dispute to threaten. Nobody's threatening anybody." Rook took one step forward. "Just one. We signed a legal lease. We're operating within it. The building is being used for a community service project." He paused. "I'm happy to discuss the specific terms with the officers if that would help clarify things." One of the officers, young, a little uncomfortable with the situation, the particular discomfort of someone who had arrived expecting one thing and encountered something more complicated, looked at Tom Haverfield. "Sir, is the lease documentation in order?" Tom looked at Grant, then at Rook, then at the paper in his hand. "I haven't had time to verify. The lease was filed with the county recorder's office yesterday morning," Rook said. "You can pull it up on the county website right now. It's public record." Grant's voice went up. "This is a cover. This whole setup is designed to intimidate my employees and give these people a foothold in—" "Grant," Sadie said it quietly. So quietly that it shouldn't have cut through the noise of his voice. And yet it did, because it was her voice, and she hadn't used it in this situation yet. And the people assembled had been waiting, without knowing they were waiting, to hear what she would do. Grant turned to her. She was aware of the riders behind her, of Luis in the bay door, of Nora, who had appeared from somewhere and was standing slightly to her left, of the morning light that was fully committed now, no longer tentative. She pulled a folder from inside her jacket. She had been carrying it for 3 days. "This is a copy of the ambulance report from the night you fired me," she said. She kept her voice steady, not aggressive, steady. "It documents Rook's injuries, the timeline of response, and the notation that the first aid rendered before the paramedics arrived was a contributing factor in preventing severe blood loss complications." She set that page on the hood of the nearest police cruiser. "This is the maintenance request form that Luis Ortega filed on September 14th, documenting the fuel leak at Pump 2 and formally requesting repair. Your signature is on the acknowledgement line." She put that down. "This is the internal email chain between you and the maintenance contractor from September 19th, in which the contractor explicitly states that Pump 2 requires full replacement and that continued operation creates a public safety hazard. Your reply says, and I'll read it directly, 'Hold on replacement. Redirect funds to Q4 operating. I'll handle the optics.'" She put that down. "And this is a statement from a former Desert Lantern employee who was present on the night I was terminated and who is prepared to testify that you were aware of the fuel leak before Raymond Callahan's motorcycle went down in the entrance lane." The lot was absolutely quiet. Grant was looking at the papers on the hood. His jaw was still set, but the certainty had left his face. What was replacing it was something she recognized from the 9 days she'd spent rebuilding herself piece by piece in the wake of his decision, the look of someone realizing that the story they've been telling themselves has met the actual facts, and the facts are not cooperating. "Where did you get those?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. From someone who had them and believed they should see the light of day. She looked at him evenly. "I'm not here to arrest you, Grant. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm standing in front of a building that has my name on it because a group of people decided that what happened to me deserved a response that wasn't revenge. It was opportunity." She picked the papers back up. "But these go to the County Safety Authority today and to the Truck Stops Ownership Group in Phoenix. And if you would like to contest a single word in them, I will absolutely welcome that conversation." Grant looked at the officers. The officers looked at the papers on the hood and then at each other. The younger one spoke first. "Sir," he said to Grant, with the careful neutrality of someone trying not to have an opinion in a situation where having an opinion was unavoidable, "it does appear that the property documentation is in order. If there's a civil dispute about the lease terms, that goes through." "It's not a civil dispute," Grant said. His voice had gone tight. "These people, Grant." Tom Haverfield spoke for the first time. His voice was tired, not angry. The voice of someone who had not wanted to be in this parking lot and was beginning to understand that the people who'd put him here had not shared all of the relevant information before doing so. "I need to make some phone calls. To Phoenix." Grant turned to look at him. "The owner is going to want to know about the maintenance records," Tom said. "I should have been shown those before today." Something changed in Grant's face. Something went out of it. The younger officer carefully picked up the maintenance request form that was still on the hood of the cruiser and looked at it without expression. "Ma'am," he said to Sadie, "you mentioned you're filing this with the County Safety Authority." "Today," Sadie said. "I'd appreciate a copy for our incident report." "Absolutely." Grant said nothing else. He got back in the pickup. Tom made his phone calls. The police took down information and left without incident. The riders watched all of it from the lot with the composed, still attention of people who had shown up to witness something and understood that their job was to witness it, not to do it for her. When the white pickup finally pulled away, the lot was quiet again. Luis appeared at her shoulder. "You had those papers for 3 days?" 2.5. "Why didn't you?" "Because I needed to know I could handle this myself first, before anyone else was here." She looked at the space where the vehicles had been. "I needed to know it wasn't them doing it for me." Luis was quiet for a moment. "You know that phone's going to ring in about 4 hours. "Which phone?" "Every phone in Kingman. Word travels fast when a woman with a folder takes down a man in a company shirt in a parking lot full of Hell's Angels and nobody throws a punch." She almost laughed again. The almost law was becoming something else, something that had actual sound in it. Rook came to stand beside her. She looked at the sign above the bay door. Monroe Road Relief, her name. Her father's name, her mother's name. The name on the deed of a house that had 12 left on its forbearance extension. "The lease," she said. "Does it cover anything that would help with?" "No," Rook said. "The lease is the lease. Your personal situation is separate." She nodded. She'd known that. She'd ask anyway, because some part of her had needed to hear the boundaries stated plainly, to know where the help ended and where she began. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I accept the challenge." She turned to face him. Every condition, every deadline, every line of the budget. She extended her hand. "I'm going to need you to be honest with me when I'm wrong." He shook her hand. His grip was careful because of the fingers, but it was firm. "Already am." She turned back to the garage. Luis had gone back inside. Nora was explaining something to the mechanic with the electrical supplies. The woman who'd brought the folding table was writing something in a notebook. People doing the specific, ordinary, necessary work of beginning something. Sadie Monroe walked back through the bay door. She had 60 days to file a business plan. She had a legal pad with gaps in it and a library card and handwriting in ink. She had an EMT certification she'd let expire and a budget she hadn't seen all the numbers in yet, and month left on a forbearance extension and a mother who said they'd figure it out. She had a garage with her name on it. She picked up the clipboard Nora had left on the workbench. She found a pen. She got to work. The business plan took 41 days, not 41. She filed it on a Tuesday morning at the county office. 2 copies, one for the record and one for the community trust that Rook's chapter attorney had established as the holding structure for the lease. The woman at the counter paged through it, without expression, 47 pages, including the insurance analysis, the service fee schedule, the emergency response protocol she'd written herself based on federal highway data, and 3 conversations with the Mojave County EMS coordinator, and the budget, which had been revised 9 times and still had 3 lines she wasn't fully confident about. "This is thorough," the woman said. "I know what the gaps are," Sadie said. "They're documented on page 31. The woman looked up. "You documented your own gaps? If I don't know something, I want the record to show I know I don't know it. That's different from ignoring it." The woman stamped the filing date and handed her the copy. "Good luck with this." She drove back to the garage. Luis was underneath a truck that belonged to a retired teacher from Bullhead City who'd blown a brake line 40 miles out and had no idea how serious that was until Luis explained it in language she could understand. Nora was doing a blood pressure check on a man who'd stopped because his wife felt dizzy and he didn't know what else to do. The water supply was down to 43 cases, which meant she needed to call the wholesaler before Thursday. She made the call. She ordered 60 cases. She negotiated the price down by 8% because she'd read the wholesaler's own cost structure in the small business database at the library, and she knew where his margin was. She hung up and felt something she was still learning to identify. Not pride exactly, but the quiet satisfaction of a problem that had been handled correctly. It lasted about 4 minutes. Then she opened the email from the EMT recertification board. She'd scheduled the exam for the following week, compressed timeline, aggressive study schedule. Every spare hour between garage operations and budget revisions spent with the manual she'd bought secondhand and annotated so heavily that the margins had their own margins. She'd been confident going in. She'd felt the knowledge sitting correctly in her mind, organized and retrievable, the way it felt when you actually understood something rather than just memorized it. She failed by 6 points. She sat in her car in the testing center parking lot for 20 minutes before she drove back to the garage. She didn't tell Nora. She didn't tell Luis. She went straight to the medical cabinet and started restocking it from the supply order that had come in that morning, moving methodically through each shelf, checking expiration dates, noting what needed to be reordered, doing the physical, concrete work of the things she had just proven she was not yet officially qualified to do. Rook called at 5. How'd it go? She put down the inventory sheet. "I failed." Silence on the line. Not the silence of disappointment, just the silence of him receiving information. "By how much?" 6 points. "What sections?" "Pharmacology and trauma assessment protocols." "The clinical portions I aced." "It was the written exam components. When can you retake it?" 30 days. "Then you've got 30 days. She sat on the workbench. Outside, she could hear Luis finishing up with the retired teacher's truck, the specific sound of tools being replaced in their correct positions. Luis was meticulous about that, about returning everything to exactly where it belonged, a quality she had come to rely on so completely that she'd stopped thinking of it as admirable and started thinking of it as structural. "Rook," she said, "still here. The insurance line in the budget. I underestimated it by $400 a month. I found out today when I got the actual policy quote." A pause. "How bad is that?" "Bad enough that I need to adjust somewhere else. I've been looking at the service fee schedule. If I increase the standard towing referral commission by 2%, will that hold?" "I think so. I'm modeling it tonight." "Okay," she waited. He didn't offer to solve it. He never did. She'd learned in the first 2 weeks that this was deliberate, that his restraint was not indifference, but the specific respect of someone who understood that solving her problems for her would hollow out the thing they were both trying to build. "There's something else," she said. "Tell me." 2 people in town, people I don't know, haven't spoken to, have been telling anyone who'll listen that Monroe Road relief is a front. that the chapter is using it to establish territory. One of them went to the local paper. The pause this time was different, longer. What did the paper do? They called me for comment. What did you say? I told them to come look at the books. I told them the lease terms are public record, and so is every donation we've accepted. I told them that if anyone could show me a single transaction that didn't have documentation on both ends, I'd publish it myself. She looked at the ceiling of the garage, the repaired roof, the new seam of metal that marked where the east section had been replaced. The reporter seemed surprised I said it. Why? I think she expected me to be defensive. Are you? She thought about it honestly. No. I'm tired of things being buried. I'd rather have everything visible, even the parts that are hard to explain, than let someone else decide what the story is. Rook made a sound that wasn't quite agreement but contained it. The paper prints, Sunday. I know. You going to be okay with whatever they write? I'm going to be okay with whatever's accurate. I can only control that side of it. She heard him exhale slowly. You're figuring out things I took 20 years to figure out. I don't have 20 years. No, I said. You don't. The article ran on Sunday. It was fair more than fair, actually. The reporter had done her homework, had pulled the county records, had spoken to the retired teacher from Bullhead City, and the man whose wife had been dizzy, and 3 other people who'd stopped at Monroe Road Relief in the first 4 weeks of operation. She'd also spoken to 2 residents who remained skeptical, and she'd printed their concerns in the same column, and she hadn't editorialized in either direction. The headline read, Roadside Gamble, a Young Woman, a Biker Brotherhood, and a 1-Year Promise. Sadie read it at 6 in the morning in the garage before anyone else arrived. She read it twice. She put it down. She made coffee. Luis came in at 7 and picked it up off the table. He read it standing up, which was how he read everything. When he finished, he set it back down. They spelled my name right, he said. They did. You think this is good or bad? Both, she said, which means it's honest. The article brought 3 things in the following week. First, a call from the Mohave County EMS coordinator who had seen the piece and wanted to know if Monroe Road Relief had considered formalizing its emergency response protocol as a complement to county services rather than a parallel structure. Second, a visit from a woman named Denise Parr, who ran a truck drivers advocacy nonprofit out of Flagstaff and wanted to understand the service fee model. Third, a handwritten letter from a 71-year-old man in Golden Valley who'd been stranded on that highway 16 months earlier during a July heat event and had waited 4 hours for roadside assistance with his wife, who had a heart condition, and he wanted Sadie to know that what she was building was something people had needed for a long time without having a name for it. She read the letter 3 times. She wrote back the same day. She kept a copy of both. She also got 2 hostile phone calls, one email calling her a gang sympathizer, and a handwritten note left under the garage's side door that said things she didn't repeat to anyone. She documented all of it. She kept it in a separate folder marked Wrecker, not because she planned to use it, but because she'd learned from the maintenance records and the ambulance report that documentation was the difference between a story someone could bury and a story that had substance. She retook the EMT exam on the 30th day. She didn't tell anyone she was going. Not Nora, not Luis, not Rook. She drove to the testing center alone at 7 in the morning with a coffee she didn't finish and the second-hand manual she'd read so many times the spine had given up entirely. She sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes first. She thought about the night she'd helped Rook, not the abstract version of it that had become the story she told herself, the concrete version, the temperature of the rain, the specific wrongness of his hand. The moment she'd realized the fuel leak was more dangerous than she'd first assessed, and she'd had to recalculate everything at the same time she was managing his treatment and managing Grant's voice in the background. She'd done all of that without a certification. She'd done it correctly. She'd gotten it right. The exam was testing knowledge she already lived in. She went inside and took it. She passed, 12 points above the minimum. She got in her car and sat in the parking lot again and allowed herself exactly 4 minutes to feel it the clean. specific satisfaction of a thing that had been hard being done, and then she drove back to the garage. Nora was at the medical station when she walked in. Luis was under the hood of a commercial van. There was a family in the waiting area, 2 kids, a father, a flat tire situation that had stranded them 90 minutes from where they were supposed to be. Sadie put her certification paperwork on the workbench. Nora looked at it, then at Sadie. When did you take it? This morning. And you didn't tell me because I needed to do it without an audience. Nora picked up the paperwork. She studied the score. She put it down. 12 over minimum. Yes, that's not barely passing. That's passing? I know. Nora looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone choosing between several true things to say and landing on the one that was most necessary. Your father would have been proud of you. Sadie hadn't expected that. She didn't know that Nora had known her father. She found out later that Nora had been a patient at the same clinic where Carol Monroe had worked, that their lives had overlapped in the peripheral way that lives in small towns did, accumulating connections that only became visible when you looked at them from a certain angle. She didn't say anything. She picked up certification paperwork and put it in the filing cabinet where it belonged. She went to help the family with the flat tire. The father didn't have a spare. He was 53, driving a car that had seen better years, and he had the expression of a man who had been managing a situation he was embarrassed about for longer than just this afternoon. She called Luis over, and Luis assessed the tire and told her they had a compatible used tire in the back that someone had donated along with a set of rims 2 weeks ago. What does a used tire run here? The father asked. For you today? Sadie looked at the family, the 2 kids, the way the younger one was leaning against her father's arm without knowing she was doing it. Standard rate is 40 for installation. The tire's donated stock, so no charge for the part. He looked at her. Is there a hardship form or something? I don't have. The tire is donated stock, she said again. That's the policy. It's in the service agreement posted at the door. He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at his kids. He looked at Sadie. Thank you, he said. Luis will have you back on the road in 30 minutes. She went back to her desk. She updated the donation inventory. She noted the tire. She moved on to the insurance adjustment she'd been modeling for 3 days, the recalculation that incorporated the $400 monthly underestimate, the revised fee schedule, the wholesale discount she'd negotiated. The numbers worked. Barely, but barely was a number. Month 3 brought the first real crisis. It arrived in the form of a local business owner named Craig Hollis, who ran a tow service out of the east side of Kingman and who had apparently done the math and decided that Monroe Road Relief's towing referral network was cutting into his margins. He came to the garage on a Wednesday afternoon and he didn't knock. He walked into the bay and he stood in the middle of it, and he looked around at the organized activity with the expression of someone taking inventory of a problem. I need to talk to the owner, he said. Luis looked up from the engine he was working on. She's in the office. Sadie heard the exchange and came out. Craig Hollis was a broad man in his mid-50s who had spent his career being the person everyone called when they had no other option, and he had built his entire business model on that captive situation. And he did not like the feeling of it becoming less captive. You're sending business to Riverton Tow, he said, and Apache Road Services. You haven't sent me a single referral since you opened. Sadie looked at him. We send referrals based on availability, response time, and pricing transparency. Your response time is 45 minutes on average. Riverton is 22. Apache's 28. I've been serving this highway for 15 years. I know. That's in my research notes. She kept her voice level. If your response time improves, you go back to the top of the referral list. The list isn't personal, Craig. It's documented, and it's based on performance metrics that I'll show you anytime you'd like to see them. His jaw tightened. You think a folder full of paper makes you legitimate? You've been open 3 months. 3 months and 12 days. And you're already acting like you run this highway. I'm acting like I'm accountable for every decision I make at this garage, which is not the same thing. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't step back. If you'd like to be part of the referral network, the criteria are on the sign by the door. Meet them and you're on the list. Don't meet them and you're not. She paused. That's the whole policy. He looked at her for a long moment. He looked at Luis. He looked at the medical station where Nora was restocking. He looked at the posted service agreement by the door. He left without another word. Luis waited until the sound of his truck had faded. He's going to be a problem, maybe. Sadie went back to the office. Or maybe he's going to improve his response time. 3 weeks later, Craig Hollis called and asked to be added to the referral network. His response time, on his first 2 documented calls, was 19 minutes. She put him on the list. She sent him a referral the following week and documented the outcome. She added him to the regular network meeting she'd started running on the first Monday of each month, a 45-minute session where every service provider connected to Monroe Road Relief reviewed the previous month's data together, openly, no private conversations about shared clients, no informal arrangements that didn't appear in the record. Craig Hollis sat through his first meeting with his arms crossed and his expression carefully neutral. But by the third meeting, he was the one who suggested the standardized response documentation form that eventually became mandatory for all network partners. She didn't point out the irony. She just implemented the form and put his name in the credits section of the operations manual. Rook came by every 2 to 3 weeks, never announced. He'd appear, drink coffee, watch the operation for a while, and then find Sadie and ask her 1 or 2 specific questions about the budget, about a personnel situation, about a decision she'd made that had consequences she might not have fully mapped yet. He never told her what the right answer was. He asked questions until she found it herself, and when she found something that genuinely surprised him, he said so. Month 4, she found one of those things. She'd been looking at the demographic data from their service logs, who they were helping, where the distress calls were clustering, what time of day. And she noticed a pattern that the raw numbers obscured. A disproportionate number of their most serious cases were arriving between 9 at night and 2 in the morning. Not breakdown situations, medical situations. People who had driven too long, who had ignored symptoms, who had talked themselves out of stopping at a proper medical facility because they were behind schedule or didn't have insurance or simply didn't want to be a burden. She restructured the overnight coverage. She brought in a retired paramedic named Howard Briggs, who'd moved to Kingman after his wife's death and was looking for somewhere to be useful. She got him in on a volunteer basis 4 nights a week with a documented protocol and a clear scope of practice agreement that she had a healthcare attorney in Flagstaff review for $40 and a promise that Monroe Road Relief would refer anyone who needed legal roadside assistance to his pro bono network. She told Rook about it at the end of month 4. He listened. He asked 3 questions about the liability bow documentation, about the scope of practice boundaries, about how she'd vetted Howard's credentials. Then he said, "You didn't call me before you made that decision." "No. 3 months ago you would have." She considered that. 3 months ago, I was still waiting to see if someone was going to tell me I'd done it wrong. What changed? I stopped waiting. He drank his coffee. He looked at the paperwork on her desk. He put the cup down. "The county EMS coordinator," he said. "The one who called after the newspaper article, Marcus Webb. He's going to reach out again. Probably in the next few weeks. I have reason to believe he's been watching the overnight numbers." She looked at him. "How do you have reason to believe that?" "Because I made it my business to understand who pays attention to what on this highway. Same way I made it my business to understand the maintenance records at Desert Lantern." He met her eyes. "I don't operate in the dark, Sadie. I operate with information." There's a difference. She absorbed that. Not just the content of it, the mechanism. The way he'd built a network over decades that allowed him to see things from multiple angles simultaneously, not to control outcomes, but to anticipate them. It was the same instinct that had made him ask about Delbert Hines' medication before he'd told her his own name in a truck stop chair. "If Webb reaches out," she said slowly, "and he wants to formalize something, don't let him define the terms," Rook said. "You define them." You know what this place does and doesn't do better than any county administrator. I know. And don't sign anything that trades your operational independence for their institutional cover. The independence is the thing. The moment you're accountable to a bureaucracy instead of to your community, you start making different decisions. She wrote that down. Not because she was going to forget it, because she wanted it in ink, in her own handwriting, in the operations journal she'd been keeping since day one. The journal that documented not just decisions, but the reasoning behind them, because she'd understood from the beginning that a business without institutional memory was just a collection of habits waiting to become mistakes. Marcus Webb called on a Thursday morning in month 5. She took the meeting. She defined the terms. She kept her operational independence and signed a service coordination agreement that made Monroe Road Relief a documented community partner without making it a subordinate of the county system. Webb was professional, thorough, and clearly had expected more resistance than he got. "You know what you want," he said at the end of the meeting. "I know what we do," she said. "That's the same thing." She also, in month 5, in the same week as the Webb meeting, in the compressed timeline of a life that had stopped having room for things to happen, of one at a time, got the call from the County Safety Authority about Grant Vickers. The investigation had taken longer than she'd expected. These things always did. The mechanisms of institutional accountability moved at the pace of process rather than urgency, and she'd had to make peace with that early, had to consciously put the outcome of that investigation into a separate compartment from the daily operation of the garage, because conflating the two would have given Grant a power over her present that he no longer deserved. But the call came, and the voice on the other end told her what she had already known for months, in the way that you knew things when you'd read the documents carefully and understood what they meant. Grant Vickers had been formally charged. Financial fraud, evidence tampering, knowing operation of a public safety hazard. 3 counts. She thanked the investigator. She hung up. She sat at her desk for exactly 2 minutes. Then she called the Truck Stops ownership group in Phoenix, not to celebrate, not to score a point, but because she had one remaining piece of unfinished business with them: her employment record. The notation that called her insubordinate and unsafe and had cost her 2 job offers in the first week after she was fired. The woman who answered was a VP of operations named Sandra Chu, who had been the person Tom Haverfield had been calling from the parking lot on the morning the riders arrived. Sandra had done her own investigation. She knew the shape of the situation before Sadie said a word. "We'd like to formally expunge the termination notation," Sandra said, "and extend an offer of reinstatement if you're interested." "I'm not interested in reinstatement," Sadie said. "I didn't think you would be. But we want it on record that it's offered." "That's fine. What I actually need is the corrected employment record filed with the state and a written acknowledgement from Desert Lantern that the termination was wrongful. We can do that by the end of the week." A pause. "That's aggressive." "It's been 5 months," Sadie said. "I think that's been patient enough." The documents arrived on Friday. She opened them at the kitchen table. Her mother was there. Carol Monroe read the acknowledgement letter carefully, the way she read everything completely, without rushing, giving every word the weight it was owed. When she finished, she set it down. She didn't say anything immediately. She just reached across the table and covered Sadie's hand with hers. One brief, solid pressure, and then she let go and got up to make dinner. That night, for the first time in 7 months, Sadie Monroe slept through to her alarm. She woke up and lay there for a moment, aware of the specific quality of a full night's sleep, the way her was present in the morning instead of arriving late, trailing the anxiety that had been her alarm clock since October. She looked at the ceiling. She listened to her mother moving in the kitchen below. She thought about the garage, about Nora's twice-weekly shifts that had quietly become 4, about Luis, who had started teaching a Saturday morning basic mechanics class to community members using donated time and donated materials, who had suggested it himself one morning like it was obvious, like it had always been part of the plan. About Howard Briggs, who showed up for his overnight shifts 15 minutes early without exception, and who had, in month 4, prevented a 70-year-old man from driving himself to a hospital he would not have survived reaching. She thought about the budget, which she still checked every morning before she checked anything else, which was still narrow, which had survived 4 months and 3 unexpected expenses, and on one category where she'd been wrong about the numbers, which was surviving, not thriving, surviving. With 7 months to go and a financial target she had not yet hit, and a road ahead that was still real and still demanding and still fully capable of producing a result she didn't want, but surviving. She got up. She got dressed. She drove to the garage. Luis was already there. He had coffee on, and he handed her a cup without looking up from the engine he was assessing, and she took it and stood next to him and looked at the engine, too. Month 5, he said. Month 5. She agreed. 7 to go. He handed her a wrench. Not because she needed to do anything with it, because it was what you did in a garage when you were standing next to someone and assessing something together. You held a tool. It was a language. She held the wrench. She thought about 7 months. She thought about what she was building and what it had already cost and how the cost had never once felt like the wrong price. She drank her coffee. The morning started. The highway outside moved with its ordinary traffic trucks, families, strangers going somewhere, and every one of them was a person who might, without knowing it, need what was here. She was here. That was the whole thing, really. That was what all of it came down to. She was here, and the door was open, and the coffee was on. 7 months in, Sadie stopped checking the financial target every morning. Not because it had been met. It hadn't. But because checking it every morning had become a kind of superstition, the financial equivalent of pressing a bruise to see if it still hurt, and she'd finally recognized that the anxiety of watching the number wasn't making the number move. What moved the number was the work. So she checked it on Mondays, formally, with coffee and the operations journal open beside her, and the other 6 days she worked. The target was a net operational surplus of 8% over 12 months. At month 7, she was at 3.2. She needed to nearly triple her margin in 5 months without expanding her cost base in a way that outpaced the growth. She'd had worse math problems. Luis found her in the office one Thursday morning in month 8, staring at the spreadsheet with the particular stillness of someone who has been looking at the same numbers long enough that the numbers have stopped being numbers and started being a question about who she was. "You've got that face," he said. "What face?" "The face that means you're about to make a decision you haven't told anyone about yet." She looked up at him. "I'm thinking about the fee schedule." "Again?" "The overnight rate structure. If I adjust the after 9 sliding scale, you've adjusted it 3 times. The 4th adjustment might be the one that works." Luis sat down across from her. He was 64 years old, and he had spent more than 3 decades diagnosing things that other people couldn't see, and he applied the same diagnostic patience to conversations that he applied to engines. He waited until the actual problem revealed itself rather than reacting to the first symptom. "The margin isn't the problem," he said. She looked at him. "The margin is tight because the volume isn't where it needs to be. And the volume isn't where it needs to be because we're still operating like we're proving we deserve to exist." He put his hands flat on the desk. "We've proven it 7 times over. The question now is whether we're going to keep asking for permission or start acting like we already have it." She sat with that. "What does that look like?" "It looks like you calling Marcus Webb back and finalizing the 3-county coordination agreement you've been sitting on for 6 weeks because you're afraid of what it means to be that visible." She opened her mouth. She closed it. She called Marcus Webb the next morning. The 3-county coordination agreement was finalized inside of 2 weeks. It formalized Monroe Road Relief as a designated emergency response partner for highway incidents across Mojave, La Paz, and Kingman counties not subordinate to the county system, as Rook had warned her, but lateral to it. Documented, insured, accountable in both directions. It meant their response calls would be logged in the county system. It meant their data would inform county infrastructure decisions. It meant that when someone called 911 from a broken-down car on a stretch of desert highway, Monroe Road Relief would receive the secondary notification within 4 minutes. It also meant the phone started ringing differently. Not just stranded travelers and flat tires, and the occasional family who'd underestimated the distance between gas stations. Now it rang with the organized urgency of a system that had decided to include her. The volume went up 31% in the first 3 weeks of the agreement. The margin moved. She updated the spreadsheet on Monday morning. She looked at the number. Then she looked at it again. 4.8. She wrote it down in the operations journal. She dated it. She closed the journal. She told no one. There were 4 months left, and 4.8 was not 8, and she had learned the hard way in the failed EMT exam, in the insurance underestimate, in the Craig Hollis confrontation, that celebrating proximity to a thing was not the same as having the thing, and that the distance between them was exactly where she needed to stay focused. Month 9 brought Howard Briggs into her office with a problem she hadn't anticipated. He sat down across from her desk in the way that serious people sat, no preamble, no easing in, and he put a medical incident report on the desk in front of her. "This is from last Tuesday," he said. 2:17 in the morning. She picked it up and read it. A 68-year-old woman. Cardiac symptoms. Howard had stabilized her, called 911, maintained monitoring until the ambulance arrived. The woman had been transported to Kingman Regional. She'd survived. Sadie looked up. "This looks correct." "It is correct." Howard leaned forward. "But I need you to understand something that isn't in the report. When I got to that car, she had been sitting there for 40 minutes. She'd called the main county line first, got put on hold, got disconnected, and then sat there because she didn't know who else to call." Sadie set the report down. 40 minutes, he said again, with cardiac symptoms. "In July heat. She survived because I got to her when I did, and because she was physically strong enough to wait that long. The next one might not be either of those things. What do you need?" "A dedicated emergency line. Separate from the general service number. Something that goes directly to whoever is on overnight coverage without routing through the main intake." He paused. "And I need it to be publicized. On the highway signs, on the county coordination network, everywhere. Because the people who need it most are the ones who don't know it exists." She looked at the report, at the timestamp, at the 40 minutes between a woman's first call and help arriving. "The dedicated line costs money I don't have budgeted," she said. "I know. And getting on the highway signage is a county process that takes—" "Marcus Webb owes you a favor," Howard said. "Use it." She looked at him. Howard Briggs was not a man who said things like "use it" without having thought carefully about what he meant by them. He'd spent 30 years as a paramedic, 30 years of systems, bureaucracy, the specific exhaustion of caring about outcomes inside a structure that cared about process. He knew exactly what he was suggesting. "If I call in that favor now," she said slowly, "I spend it. And there are 4 months left in the trial period. And if someone else dies waiting for a call to route through the main line," Howard said, "you spend something else." She picked up the phone and called Marcus Webb. Webb was quiet for a moment after she explained what she needed. Then he said, "The signage authorization takes 60 days minimum." "I know. I can't make that process faster. I'm not asking you to." She paused. "What can you do in the next 30 days? Another silence. "Longer. I can get you listed on the county emergency dispatch secondary notification with a dedicated callback number. Every 911 call from this corridor gets Monroe Road Relief as an automatic secondary contact. That's better than the sign." It usually is. She had the dedicated line set up within 2 weeks. She put it on the garage's posted materials, on the county coordination network, on the simple website that Nora's grandson had built for them for free, because Nora had asked, and because 23-year-olds apparently did things for grandmothers without requiring much additional justification. The first call came on a Wednesday night at 11:43. Howard took it. He was on scene in 11 minutes. He told her about it the next morning with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had spent a career doing this work and had never stopped finding value in doing it correctly. She added the incident to the operations journal. She added Howard's name to the acknowledgement section. She'd started compiling the list of people whose specific contributions had made the thing what it was. It had 42 names on it by month 10, 42 names in 12 months. She'd walked through the bay door alone. Month 10 also brought the moment she almost lost everything. Not to Grant Vickers, his trial was proceeding through the court system with the slow inevitability of documented evidence meeting legal process, and she'd stopped monitoring it closely because its outcome no longer determined hers. Not to a financial crisis or a personnel problem or an infrastructure failure. It came on a Saturday morning when a man walked into the garage and introduced himself as the new regional director for a national roadside assistance franchise that she knew by name, because everyone knew it by name, the kind of company that operated on economies of scale and brand recognition and the specific power of a logo people trusted without knowing why. His name was Derek Foss. He was in his late 40s, well-dressed in the particular way of someone who traveled for business and had learned to compress professionalism into luggage. He asked if he could speak with the owner. She came out from the office. He smiled. The practiced smiles of someone who'd had this conversation before and knew roughly how it went. "I'll be direct," he said. "We've been watching Monroe Road Relief for about 6 months. The coordination agreement, the overnight response data, the service model. It's impressive for an independent operation of this size. Thank you. We'd like to make you an offer." She looked at him. What kind of offer? He named a number. She did not react to it. She had spent 12 months learning not to react to things before she understood them. "Tell me what the number means." "Acquisition. Full buyout of the operational infrastructure. We'd retain the Monroe Road Relief branding. It has real local equity. Our research confirms that, and the staff would receive competitive offers. You'd transition to a consulting role for 12 months with a separate compensation package." The garage was quiet around them. Luis was in the far bay, and she could hear the particular sound of him working methodical, present. Nora wouldn't be in until the afternoon. Howard's overnight notes were still on her desk, dated this morning. "The lease transfers in 33 days, she said. "We're aware of the timeline. And you're offering to buy something that I don't yet legally own. We're offering to buy it the moment you do. Or to negotiate a structure where we step in as the acquiring party at the point of transfer, which simplifies." "It doesn't simplify anything," she said. "It eliminates the point." She looked at him steadily. "The point of the last 11 months was to build something that belonged to this community. Not to this brand, not to this building, not even to me specifically, to this community." She paused. "A franchise acquisition doesn't do that." His expression shifted slightly. Not offended, recalibrating. "The number I quoted is a significant—" "I know what the number is." She kept her voice even. "It's a significant amount. And if this were about money, we wouldn't be having this conversation." She looked at the posted service agreement by the door, at the operations manual on the shelf behind him, at the 42 names in the acknowledgments. She couldn't see from here, but knew the position of anyway. "Please give me your card. If the structure of what we're doing here changes at some point in the future, I'll call you." He gave her the card. He was professional about it, no pressure, no ultimatum, the practiced exit of someone who understood that a no today was sometimes a yes in 18 months. He left. She stood in the middle of the garage for a moment. Then she went back to her desk. She put his card in the back of the filing cabinet. She opened the spreadsheet. The margin was at 6.1. 8 weeks left. She needed 2 more points in 8 weeks. She worked. She worked in the specific way she'd learned over 11 months, not frantically, not desperately, but with the sustained, methodical intensity of someone who understood that panic was just adrenaline without a plan. She reviewed every service line. She found 4 places where documentation improvements could reduce insurance overhead. She renegotiated the wholesale water contract because she now had 11 months of volume data to negotiate with. She brought Luis and Nora and Howard into the numbers conversation for the first time, Not because she'd been hiding it, but because she'd been carrying it alone, and she recognized, finally, that carrying it alone was not discipline. It was pride. Luis looked at the spreadsheet for 3 minutes. The tire inventory, he said. We're sitting on stock we're not charging enough for because you set the price point in month one and never adjusted for the donation intake volume. She looked at the line. He was right. Nora looked at the staffing costs. My hours are logged as volunteer, but the materials I'm using are coming out of the operating budget. If we reclassify the material costs as donated, which they are, because I'm buying them myself, it changes this line by about $60 a month. Nora, you can't keep buying. It's my money and my choice, and it's been happening for 4 months. So the reclassification is just catching up to reality. Nora said it the way she said everything, without drama. With the authority of someone who had been a nurse for 3 decades and did not require permission to state a fact. Howard looked at the overnight data. The response call volume in the secondary notification system is generating county cost offset credits we haven't applied for. I found the form 2 weeks ago and didn't mention it because I thought you knew. He put a piece of paper on her desk. It's this form. Line 14. It's worth about $300 a month retroactive to the agreement start date. She looked at the form. She looked at her team. These 3 people, sitting across from her with the spreadsheet between them, each of them having carried a piece of the solution without knowing she needed it. Why didn't any of you? She stopped. She knew why. Because she hadn't asked. Because she'd been so committed to proving she could carry that she'd accidentally made the garage feel like her burden to manage rather than their shared project to sustain. We were waiting for you to let us in, Luis said. Not accusatory, just accurate. She filed the form that afternoon, retroactive to the agreement date. She adjusted the tire pricing. She reclassified the materials. She updated the spreadsheet. 6.9. 4 weeks left. She did not sleep well. She slept that was different from where she'd been in October, when sleep was something she fell into and climbed out of with the same desperate efficiency as everything else. Now she slept and she woke, and the anxiety was present but contained. It had edges. She could identify it and set it aside in the morning, the same way she set aside anything she couldn't act on before 6 a.m. She was at the garage at 5:45 on a Tuesday morning in the 11th month when the call came in on the dedicated overnight line. Howard had ended his shift at 4. The line was set to forward to Sadie's cell between 4 and 7, the gap window they hadn't fully staffed yet. She answered it on the second ring. Monroe Road Relief, this is Sadie. The voice on the other end was a man, older, the particular thinness of someone speaking through genuine effort. My bus broke down. I think I'm about 12 miles east of Kingman on Route 66. It's a tour bus. I've got 31 passengers. A lot of them are elderly. It's very hot. She was already pulling up the county map. What's your name? Earl. I'm the driver. Earl, are any of your passengers showing medical symptoms right now? Dizziness, chest pain, confusion? A pause. Voices in the background. Some of them are, yeah. 2 women are saying they feel dizzy. One gentleman, his color isn't good. Earl, I need you to listen carefully. Do not move anyone unless they are in immediate danger inside the vehicle. Keep the emergency doors open for airflow. I'm sending help right now, and I need you to stay on this line. She was already on her other phone, calling Howard, calling Luis, pulling the supply checklist. How long have you been stopped? About 40 minutes. I tried the main county line and I was on hold, and then you did the right thing calling us. 40 minutes. Okay. She had Howard on the other line. She was coordinating both conversations simultaneously. The same way she'd managed Rook's treatment and Grant's voice and the fuel leak and the 911 call in a parking lot 11 months ago. The same skill. Grown now, practiced, embedded. They were on scene in 14 minutes. 31 passengers. 16 of them over 70. 3 showing signs of heat stress. 1 a man named Gerald. 74. A retired school principal from Tucson, showing early cardiac symptoms that Howard recognized and addressed, while Sadie ran intake on every other passenger and Luis assessed the bus engine. The bus had thrown a belt. Luis had the part. He'd started carrying a broader inventory of common failure components 3 months ago, after a similar situation on a smaller scale, and the belt was on his shelf and in his hands within 20 minutes. She got water to every passenger. She got Howard's assessment done. She got Gerald's stabilized and into a position that reduced his cardiac stress while the ambulance covered the distance. She got the other 30 passengers cooled and hydrated, and she talked to them while she did it, not the clinical talk of a protocol, the human talk of a person who understood that being scared and stranded at 72 years old required more than water and an up procedure. She learned their names, some of them. One of them was a woman named Miriam Cross, who sat in the third row with a canvas bag on her lap and watched Sadie work with an attention that was different from the other passengers, not anxious, not grateful in the overwhelmed way of people in crisis. Focused, the specific focus of someone who was not just receiving the service, but understanding it. Gerald was in the ambulance and stabilized by the time the belt was replaced and the bus was running. Luis had done it in 51 minutes. He'd done it correctly, and he documented every step in the maintenance log because they documented everything, always, and that discipline had never felt more important than it did right now, with 30 people watching. Sadie went down the aisle of the bus to make sure every passenger was well enough to continue. Miriam Cross caught her arm when she reached the third row. "Sit down for a moment," Miriam said. Sadie sat. She was running on the specific energy of crisis resolution, not adrenaline exactly. More like clarity, the feeling of having moved correctly through something difficult and knowing it while it was still happening. "How long have you been operating?" Miriam asked. 11 months and 18 days. "What's your call volume?" Sadie looked at her. "Are you a journalist?" "No." Miriam opened the canvas bag. She produced a business card and handed it over. "I'm the retired founder of the Southwest Regional Roadside Service Cooperative. We operate in 12 states. I've been looking for an independent partner in this corridor for about 2 years." Sadie looked at the card. She looked at Miriam Cross, who was 73 years old and had the eyes of someone who had built things and broken things and understood the difference between them. "What kind of partner?" Sadie said carefully. "The kind where you stay independent and we provide a service contract. Your pricing structure, your protocols, your staff, your operation. We plug you into a regional network that sends you documented referrals and provides administrative support in exchange for performance reporting." Miriam paused. "It's not an acquisition." "I know what an acquisition looks like," Sadie said. Miriam smiled slightly. "I'm sure you do." She looked at the bus around them, the passengers, the water bottles, the orderly calm that had replaced the panic of 40 minutes ago. "This is a legitimate service operation. It functions because it's been built correctly, not because it's been funded generously. That's rarer than people think, and I've been doing this long enough to know the difference." She looked back at Sadie. "What do you need to make this sustainable on your own terms?" Sadie was quiet for a moment. "A service contract covering 3 counties," she said. "Performance-based. Documented on both ends. Nothing that touches our operational independence or our fee structure or our community service. I can have a draft to you in 10 days. I'll have our terms to you in 7. Miriam looked at her for a long moment. Then she put her hand out. Sadie shook it. She got off the bus. She stood on the highway shoulder, and she looked at the garage in the middle distance, the repaired roof, the sign she could read from here, because she'd stood in this corridor enough times to know exactly how the lettering sat from every angle. She thought about what had just happened, not the crisis, the resolution. The specific sequence of events that had required 11 months of correct decisions to produce the outcome of the last 4 hours. The belt in Luis's inventory. The dedicated line that Earl had found because they'd put it in the right places. The service protocol that Howard had followed precisely. The documentation that meant Miriam Cross could look at their records and know within 20 minutes whether Monroe Road relief was what it appeared to be. She called Rook. He picked up on the second ring. "I need to tell you something," she said. "You sound different." "I think I am different." She looked at the highway. I had a situation this morning. 31 passengers, heat emergency, one cardiac case. Everyone okay? Gerald is stable. Everyone else is fine. The bus is running. She paused. A woman on the bus offered us a 3-county service contract. Independent, performance-based, on our terms. Silence on the line. The good kind. Her name is Miriam Cross, Sadie said. She founded the Southwest Regional Roadside Service Cooperative. She's legitimate. I'm going to verify that 6 ways before I sign anything. But I already know she's legitimate. How do you know? Because she asked me what I needed before she told me what she was offering. That's not how people talk when they're trying to take something from you. Rook was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before, not pride exactly, but something adjacent to it, something personal. You going to be okay for the last few weeks? I'm going to be more than okay. How are the numbers? She looked at the spreadsheet on her phone. She'd updated it this morning before the call came in. 6.9. I need 8. And the contract. If it's what it looks like, it closes the gap. When do you think you'll know? 7 days, she said. I'm sending our terms tonight. She sent them that evening from her desk at the garage, with Luis and Nora sitting nearby, not because she'd asked them to, but because they'd both found reasons to be there at 6 in the evening, and she understood that this was what 42 names in an acknowledgments section actually looked like in practice. People who showed up without being summoned because they understood that what was built here was partly theirs too. Miriam's response came back in 4 days, not 7. It was a counter on 2 minor points and a clean acceptance of everything else. Sadie negotiated the 2 points without conceding either one. The final agreement was signed digitally at 8:47 on a Thursday morning, and she printed a copy and put it in the filing cabinet and sat for 30 seconds at her desk before she picked up her coffee and went back to work. She updated the spreadsheet the following Monday. She sat very still for a moment. 8.4. She checked the formula. She checked the inputs. She ran the calculation manually on the legal pad beside her keyboard. 8.4. She picked up the legal pad. She walked to the bay door. Luis was at the workbench. Nora was at the medical station. Howard had come in early. He'd started doing that in the last 2 weeks. The quiet gravitational pull of an ending that everyone could sense, even though no one had said it. We hit it, she said. Nobody spoke for a second. Then Luis put his wrench down. Nora closed the cabinet. Howard looked up from the incident log. 8%, Luis said. 8.4. Nora sat down on the nearest chair. She was not a woman who sat abruptly, and the abruptness of it said more than any words she might have found. Luis looked at the ceiling. He looked at his hands. He looked at Sadie. Your father, he said. He would know, she said. She said it quickly, not to cut him off, but because she needed to say it before the feeling that was rising in her chest made speech complicated. I know, she called her mother. Carol Monroe answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting, which meant she'd known. This call was coming. The way mothers knew things, not through information, but through the accumulated intelligence of having watched someone they loved move through the world. We hit it, Mom. Silence. The particular silence of someone who has been holding something in suspension for a very long time and is carefully, deliberately releasing it. Come home for dinner, her mother said. I will. I'll make your father's recipe. She held the phone for a moment after they hung up. She did not cry. She stood in the bay door of a garage that had her name on it, that had been impossible 11 months ago and was real this morning. And she breathed the way you breathed after something was over fully, completely, with the specific gratitude of a person who understood exactly what the air had cost. Rook arrived the morning of the one-year gathering without announcing himself, the way he always arrived. She heard his truck and was already at the bay door when he came across the lot. He had a folder in his hand. She recognized the shape of it, legal documents, the weight and thickness of something that had been formally prepared. She'd been expecting it and still felt her pulse change when she saw it. He handed it over without ceremony. She opened it. She read the transfer documentation. Her name as operating director of the Monroe Road Relief Community Trust. The ownership of the lease the equipment inventory, the operational infrastructure transferred, formally and completely, from the chapter holding trust to the community fund, with her as director. She read every page. She wasn't going to sign anything she hadn't read. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. She signed it. She handed it back. He countersigned and gave her the original. There's something else, he said. She looked at him. The night of the storm. The saddlebag. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. I told you it was medication for someone who'd done something for me a long time ago. Delbert Hines. When I was 31, I went off a mountain road in Colorado in November. No phone signal. Temperature dropping. He looked at the horizon. Delbert was a long-haul trucker. He stopped. He stayed with me for 4 hours until help came. He gave me his coat, and he sat in the cold, and he talked to me the whole time because he knew that keeping me conscious was the thing that kept me alive. A pause. He told me later that he'd almost driven past, that he saw me and thought about his schedule, and then thought, what kind of man drives past? He looked back at her. I never forgot that. I spent a long time looking for ways to pay it back. The medication was one of them. She stood there with the ownership papers in her hands. You made the same choice he made, Rook said. In that truck stop. You saw someone and you could have kept walking and you didn't. He nodded at the garage. Everything that's in there came from that one moment when you decided what kind of person you were. She didn't trust herself to say everything she was thinking. She said the thing that was most true. He saved your life, she said. And you saved Delbert's. And I stopped you from bleeding out on a fuel-soaked parking lot. And somewhere down that road, some of what we built here is going to reach someone we'll never know about. She looked at him. That's the whole point, isn't it? It doesn't stop. Rook looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. It doesn't. The gathering that afternoon was not a ceremony. She'd specifically resisted the word ceremony because ceremony implied a performance, and this was not a performance, it was a community showing up to a place that had learned to hold it. Riders and mechanics and nurses and a retired tow operator and a county EMS coordinator and a woman named Miriam Cross who'd driven up from Phoenix and a 71-year-old man from Golden Valley who'd written a letter and brought it in person this time. Her mother, in the chair Louise had carried from the office because Carol Monroe was going to sit if she had to stand for more than an hour. Sadie stood at the bay door. She had prepared something to say and then decided not to say it because everything she'd prepared had sounded like a speech. And this wasn't a speech. This was the last day of the first year of something that was going to outlast the speech. She looked at the people in the lot. All of them. Every face, a specific and irreplaceable reason that the thing she was holding, the ownership papers, the contract with Miriam Cross, the county coordination agreement, the operations journal with 42 names in it existed at all. We're going to keep the door open, she said. That's all. We're going to keep the door open and the coffee on, and anyone who needs something, a tire, a glass of water, a blood pressure check, someone to talk to at 2 a.m. on a bad highway night is going to find us here. She turned to the entrance. She looked at the sign. The temporary one was gone. It had been replaced 2 weeks ago. In the quiet way that Louise did things, she'd arrived one morning and it was simply there. The new sign, permanent, the letters cut in steel. No one left on the roadside. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at the scholarship certificate on the table, inside the Paul Monroe Emergency Medical Scholarship. Her father's name on it, awarded for the first time this year to a 23-year-old truck stop employee named James Keller, who had testified against Grant Vickers, despite having every practical reason not to, who had wanted to study emergency medicine since he was 16 and hadn't found a path to it until now. James Keller was standing near the back of the crowd. He caught her eye and looked away immediately, not from discomfort, but from the specific emotion of someone who hasn't yet learned how to hold a gift without flinching. She'd fix that. She had time now. That evening, after the crowd had thinned and the riders had left in the organized, deliberate way they did everything, after Louise had locked the tool cabinets and Nora had restocked the medical station for tomorrow, and Howard had arrived for his overnight shift with his thermoses and his incident log, Sadie sat at her desk alone. She opened the operations journal. She wrote the date. She wrote 8.4. She wrote transferred. She wrote year 2 begins tomorrow. She closed the journal. She looked at the dedication line on the front of it, which she'd written on day 1 in the same ink she'd been using ever since, when she wasn't sure whether the journal would last a year or whether she would. She'd written, "For my father, who said the measure of a person is what they do with what they have." She put her hand on the cover for a moment. The garage was quiet around her. The highway outside moved, the way highways always move, steady, constant, indifferent, full of strangers going places, and some of them afraid, and some of them tired, and some of them about to need something they didn't know was waiting for them 12 miles outs of Kingman, Arizona. The door was open. The coffee was on. And Sadie Monroe was exactly where she'd decided to be. Not because someone had put her there, not because a storm had carried her there, but because she had looked at a man in the rain and made a choice, and then made another, and then another, until the choices had become a life she recognized as her own. That was the whole story. And it was only the beginning.